When I was 30, I took a temporary apartment in a town I had never planned to live in. It was in upstate New York, in a place that looked almost decorative during the day. Old brick storefronts, church steeples, narrow roads, and trees that were beautiful in October and unbearable by January, when every branch looked dead and sharpened. I was there for work, filling a 6-month contract position at a regional insurance office after a staff shortage. The pay was better than what I'd been making, and the company gave me a small housing stipend, which sounded generous until I realized what small meant in a market with almost no vacancies. By the time I got there in late November, the only place still available in my price range was the upper unit of an old 2-family house on Willow Street. The landlord, a man named Gerald, was in his 60s and seemed eager in a way that felt less like friendliness and more like relief. He kept saying things like, "You're quiet, right? And you don't guess all the time, do you? And you strike me as someone who keeps to himself." I should have paid more attention to that. The house itself was old, but not terrible. White exterior paint, flaking in strips, narrow enclosed front porch, a driveway with just enough room for 2 cars nose to tail. My apartment was upstairs, reached by a side entrance and a steep set of narrow wooden stairs. The lower unit had been vacant for the winter, according to Gerald, which meant I basically have the place to myself. That sounded perfect. The upstairs apartment had sloped ceilings, uneven floors, and old radiators that clicked and hissed at random hours like they were trying to start conversations. The bedroom faced the backyard. The living room faced the street. The kitchen was barely large enough to turn around in if the fridge door was open, but I'd lived in worse places. The first week was fine. The second week, the noises started. At first, they were easy to explain. Footsteps in an old house, pipes expanding, wind bumping loose siding. Sounds carry differently in winter too, when everything outside is frozen and the air is dry. Even small noises seem sharper. I told myself all of that, but what I kept hearing wasn't just house noise. It sounded like someone walking in the apartment above mine. That was impossible because there was no apartment above mine. I was on the top floor. Above me was just a crawl space attic under the roof. The first time I heard it clearly was around 11:30 at night. I was on the couch half watching something on my laptop when I heard slow footsteps overhead, crossing from the far end of the living room toward the bedroom. Not scampering, not settling, not random creaking. Footsteps, heavy enough to place as adult-sized, measured, unhurried. I muted the laptop and listened. The steps stopped. I stayed still for maybe a full minute. Then I heard 3 more, directly above the hall leading to my bedroom. I stood up so fast I hit my knee on the coffee table. I remember actually looking upward, as if that would help me understand it. The ceiling was cracked in one corner, pale beige under weak lamplight, completely normal looking. I waited for more sound and heard nothing. The next day, I mentioned to Gerald while he was salting the walkway. He didn't smile. That was the first thing I noticed. Most landlords laugh off complaints at first. Gerald just stopped salting and looked at me for a second too long. "Old houses do that," he said finally. It sounded like footsteps. Probably squirrels. "In the attic? Happens." But the way he said it made it obvious he wanted the conversation over. He finished salting, gave me a quick nod, and left before I could say anything else. That should have bothered me more than it did. The truth is, when you're living somewhere temporary, you work very hard not to make problems. You don't want to be dramatic. You don't want to seem difficult. You don't want to start over looking for housing in the middle of winter. So I let it go for a while. Then, a few nights later, I woke up around 2 o'clock in the morning because I heard a sound directly above my bed. A dragging sound, slow, controlled, like something heavy being pulled across wood. I was fully awake instantly. I lay there staring into the dark, every muscle tight, listening as the sound moved from one end of the ceiling to the other. Drag, pause, drag, then silence. I reached for my phone and turned on the flashlight. The room looked empty and ordinary. Dresser, chair with a jacket over it, closed bedroom door, frost feathering the lower corners of the window. Then came a soft thump from overhead, right above where my head was on the pillow. I got out of bed and did not sleep in that room the rest of the night. I sat on the couch with all the lights on until morning. The next afternoon, I asked Gerald if I could see the attic. He stared at me. Why? Because something is up there. There's nothing up there. Then let me look. He hesitated, then sighed, and led me down to the first floor hallway. There was a narrow pull-string hatch in the ceiling, just outside the vacant lower unit. He tugged it, and a folding ladder came down with a dry metallic rattle. He went up first, which I appreciated at the time. The attic was cramped, dusty, and filled mostly with insulation beams and old storage junk. Paint cans, broken lamps, collapsed cardboard boxes, a headboard, and what looked like pieces of an old crib. The roof sloped so low at the edges that an adult would have to crouch almost immediately. Gerald shined a flashlight around and gave me an annoyed look like the tour itself was proof I'd wasted his time. See, he said. I did see. And I also saw something he either missed or pretended not to. Near the center of the attic floor, between two joists, the insulation was compressed into a long, flattened area, like someone had been lying there repeatedly. I walked over and crouched. There were other signs too. A crushed water bottle, an empty soup can, the stub of a candle, a dark blanket bunched partly behind a box. I turned and looked at Gerald. He looked at the floor for 1 second, then back at me. That wasn't there before, he said. It was such an obvious lie that I didn't even know how to respond. He began talking very quickly after that. Maybe a maintenance worker had come up there. Maybe neighborhood kids had gotten in somehow years ago. Maybe it was old. Maybe it was nothing. He kept saying maybe until I interrupted and asked the only question that mattered. Does someone have access to this attic besides through that hatch? He hesitated. There's an old crawl access in the back wall of the upstairs coat closet, he said, but it's nailed shut. That night, I checked the closet. The panel was there, about 2 feet high and 3 feet wide, painted over so many times it almost blended into the wall. It had definitely been nailed shut once. But recently, very recently, the bottom corner had been pried loose. The paint around the edge was cracked and flaking, and one nail stuck halfway out like it had been pulled and pushed back by hand. I called Gerald immediately. He didn't answer. I texted him a picture. He replied 20 minutes later, probably old damage. I'll look tomorrow. I didn't believe that for a second. I drove to a hardware store before it closed and bought a cheap motion alarm, a wedge doorstop, and a can of pepper spray, even though I wasn't completely sure it was legal to have inside the office where I worked. On the way back, snow started falling in that dry, whispery way it does when the storm is just getting serious. By midnight, Willow Street was white and nearly silent. I wedged the bedroom door, set the motion alarm in the closet, shoved the dresser partly in front of it, and sat awake on the couch with the TV on mute. Around 1:15 a.m., I heard it again, a single footstep above me, then another, crossing slowly over the ceiling. I held my breath. The sound went toward the bedroom. Then I heard a very soft creak from the bedroom closet. The motion alarm did not go off. For a second, I was confused. Then I realized the reason. The closet door wasn't opening. Something was pressing very gently against the inside of it. Not enough to trigger movement in the room. Just enough to make the wood shift. I was frozen on the couch, staring toward the dark hallway that led to the bedroom. Another tiny creak. Then another, as if someone inside the closet was testing how much force the dresser and wedge could resist without making much noise. I don't know how long I sat there before I finally stood up. It might have been 10 seconds. It felt like 10 minutes. I grabbed my keys, my wallet, and my phone. I didn't go toward the bedroom. I went straight for the apartment door, opened it, and stepped out into the freezing hall in my socks and coat. The moment I got into my car, I called 911. I told the dispatcher there was possibly someone inside the walls or attic of my apartment, and that I'd heard movement coming through a closet access panel. I sounded insane even to myself, but she kept me on the line and told me officers were on the way. Snow was falling hard enough now that the streetlights turned it into a bright blur. I sat in the driver's seat, watching the upstairs windows. Nothing moved, no shadow crossed, no light switched on. The apartment looked perfectly empty. 2 officers arrived, maybe 8 minutes later. It felt longer. They went in with flashlights while I stood on the porch, half frozen and trying not to picture what they might find. One of them came back out after a few minutes and asked me to describe exactly where the closet panel was. Then they went up again. Then there was a crash from inside. I heard one of them shout. The next part happened fast. One officer came down the stairs with a man in handcuffs, pushing his head low through the doorway. He was thin, maybe mid-40s, with a patchy beard and gray knit cap and a kind of hollow winter skin that looks almost translucent. His expression wasn't wild or angry. That would have been easier to process. He just looked tired, irritated, and slightly embarrassed, like he'd been caught breaking a minor rule. The second officer came down carrying a flashlight and said to his partner, "There's more stuff up there." The man had been living in the attic, not for a night, not for a week, for months, maybe longer. They found blankets, canned food, water bottles, stolen mail, tools, batteries, old photos from the lower apartment, and a notebook with dates written in it. My move-in date was in the notebook, so were my work hours for several days, or close enough to be recognizable. So were little observations that still make me sick to remember. He falls asleep on couch with TV on. He talks in sleep, sometimes. Usually showers before 7. Keeps wallet in kitchen bowl. One of the officers later told me they believed he had been entering my apartment while I was at work and possibly while I was asleep. He had a route through the closet panel into the attic, then across the gap above the hallway where the framing had shifted decades earlier. From there, he could lower himself into a dead space between walls and come down through a maintenance opening behind the upstairs linen closet, an opening that had been hidden by shelving. When police searched that space, they found something else, a folding chair, positioned behind a vent opening that looked into my bedroom. I left the apartment that night and never slept there again. The company put me in a hotel for the rest of my contract, and Gerald spent the next week calling and texting like a man whose life was collapsing, which in a way it was. He claimed he didn't know anyone was up there, claimed the attic hadn't been checked in years, claimed the lower unit used to be occupied by a tenant who left suddenly the winter before. That phrase got stuck in my head. Left suddenly. A detective spoke to me twice after that. The man in the attic had a history of trespassing and burglary, mostly nonviolent. He'd done maintenance work years earlier for a contractor who had serviced older homes in the area. That was probably how he knew how to access spaces most people wouldn't notice. He'd likely chosen a house because the lower unit had been empty and the upstairs tenant changed every so often. But one thing never sat right with me. The detective said the man insisted he had never intended to hurt anyone. He said he just needed a place to stay and liked houses where people lived alone because they were predictable. That alone was bad enough. But before the man was taken away that night, while the officers were standing with him on the porch, he looked over at me and said something I still think about more than anything else. He said very calmly, "You were easier than the woman downstairs." I asked the detective later what that meant. He told me they were still trying to track down the previous downstairs tenant. That was the last time I spoke to him. Maybe they found her. Maybe there was a harmless explanation. Maybe she broke a lease and moved out without notice. Maybe he only meant she had been harder to study, harder to avoid, harder to predict. I have tried very hard to believe one of those maybes. The problem is what happened a few days after I moved into the hotel. My old apartment building mailbox key was still on my ring, and I realized I had some mail waiting there. I went back in the afternoon, broad daylight, because I didn't want to ever see that house at night again. The police tape was gone. Gerald's truck wasn't there. Snow covered the front walk in a thin, fresh layer. The whole place looked blank, as if nothing had happened. I opened the mailbox, sorted through a few envelopes, and was about to leave when I noticed something taped inside the little metal door. A folded piece of lined paper. No stamp, no envelope, just my name written on the outside. My hands actually started shaking before I even opened it. Inside was one sentence in cramped handwriting. "I was in the room when you called the police." That was it. No signature, no threat, no explanation. The detective later told me it was probably written before his arrest and placed there sometime earlier. He said there was no evidence the man had come back. They checked hotel security too, just in case. Nothing. But that sentence did something permanent to me. Because up until then, no matter how awful the situation was, There had still been a timeline in my head that protected me. I heard the closet. I left the apartment. Then I called 911. That sentence destroyed the middle part. It meant when I was standing in the living room grabbing my keys, or in the hallway pulling on my coat, or locking the apartment door behind me. He may already have been inside the room with me, not above me, not behind the wall. In the room, quiet enough that I never knew. It has been 6 years now, and I still live differently because of that winter. I check closets in every hotel room. I look for attic hatches anywhere I rent. I don't like top-floor apartments unless the ceilings are solid and modern, and I never sleep with bedroom doors open anymore. A few months ago, I was staying overnight for work in Vermont during another snowstorm. Around 2 o'clock in the morning, I woke to a soft ticking sound from the radiator, and for one miserable second, I was back on Willow Street, staring into the dark and waiting for the sound above my ceiling to begin. It didn't. There was nothing there. But I still got up, checked every closet, checked the bathroom, checked the deadbolt, and sat awake until dawn watching snow gather on the windowsill. Because once you've learned that a person can live over your head for weeks without you knowing, every winter noise after that belongs to them a little. In January of 2021, I spent 3 nights at a roadside motel in western Nebraska during a work trip I should have postponed. I was 34, working as a field adjuster for a commercial insurance company, and I'd been sent out to inspect storm damage on a cluster of agricultural properties after a freeze event. It was the kind of job that sounded more important than it felt. Most of my time was spent driving long distances, photographing roofs, writing reports in empty parking lots, and eating bad food from gas stations because everything in small towns closed at 9. That week, a second storm moved in faster than expected. By the time I finished at the last property on a Thursday afternoon, the sky had turned the color of dirty steel, and the wind was pushing fine snow sideways across the highway hard enough to make the road seem half erased. My company wanted me at one more inspection about an hour north the next morning. So instead of driving back to the city, I booked a room at a motel just off the interstate in a town called Merrow. The place was called the Pine Rest Motor Lodge. It had one of those old vertical signs out front where half the letters were burned out, a single-story office attached to a long 2-story building, an empty restaurant next door that looked like it closed sometime in the late 90s and never reopened. The parking lot had maybe 6 other vehicles in it, all with crusted snow around the tires like they hadn't moved in a while. I almost left when I saw it. The whole place had the look of somewhere people ended up instead of choosing, but the roads were getting worse. It was already getting dark, and the next nearest hotel was 40 minutes away if the interstate stayed open. So I parked, grabbed my duffel bag, and went into the office. The man at the desk was in his late 50s or early 60s, with a gray mustache, a quilted vest over a flannel shirt, and reading glasses hanging low on his nose. His name tag said Norman, though when he handed me the room key card, he told me everyone just called him Norm. He was polite in the tired, automatic way of someone who worked too many quiet hours alone. "You're in 214, he said. "Second floor, end of the hall." I signed the receipt. He tapped the counter with one finger before handing it over. "Ice machine's out," he said. "So, don't bother with it." I remember nodding like that was useful information, but the way he said it stood out, not casually, more like a warning phrased as maintenance advice. Then he added, "If you need anything after 11, call the office phone. Don't go wandering." I gave a small laugh because I thought he was joking. He didn't laugh back. Outside, the wind had picked up. I climbed the exterior metal staircase with my bag bumping against my leg and found room 214 at the far end of the second floor walkway. The motel formed an L shape, and from my room, you could see most of the lot, the highway beyond it, and the glowing soda machine outside the office. The room itself was exactly what you'd expect. Beige walls, synthetic bedspread, framed photo of a snowy pine forest, heater unit under the window, and a bathroom that smelled faintly like bleach over mildew. Not nice, not filthy, just old. I ordered takeout from the only place still open, answered a few emails, and turned on the TV for background noise while I filled out notes from the day. Around 9:40. I started hearing a sound from outside, a metallic thud, not loud, just regular enough to notice. Thud, pause, thud, pause. At first, I thought it was a stairwell door downstairs or some loose piece of gutter moving the wind. But after 10 minutes, it was still happening, evenly spaced, same exact tone every time. Eventually, curiosity got to me. I pulled back the curtain and looked out. At the far end of the second floor walkway, just past my room and around the corner where the building extended into the other wing, there was a recessed alcove with a vending machine, an ice machine, and a payphone mounted on the wall. A yellow bulb above it cast a weak cone of light. Nobody was there. The thud came again, and I realized it was the sound of the ice machine door opening and closing. I stood there for a second, waiting for someone to step into view. Nobody did. Then, after maybe 15 seconds, the door on the machine lifted slightly on its own and fell shut again with the same hollow metallic sound. The wind, I told myself. That had to be it. I let the curtain fall and went back to work. Around 11:15, I brushed my teeth, turned off the TV, and got into bed. The storm had gotten worse by then. I could hear snow hissing against the window and the heater clicking on and off. Just as I was drifting off, I heard the thud again. Then again, closer this time. Somehow, even though I knew it was the same machine at the same distance, I buried my head deeper into the pillow and told myself I was not going to let a broken ice machine turn into one of those things my brain fixated on all night. I did eventually fall asleep. I woke up at 2:13 a.m. because someone was knocking on my door. 3 knocks. Not pounding. Not desperate. Just firm, controlled knocks. I sat up instantly and stared at the darkness, completely disoriented. Then came 3 more. I checked my phone. No messages. No missed calls. There were a few possibilities that ran through my head very quickly. Motel staff. Wrong room. Another guest with a problem. Someone drunk. I got out of bed and went to the door, quietly without turning on the lights. There was no peephole, which I remember thinking was ridiculous and unsettling at the same time. Yeah, I called through the door. No answer. I stood there listening. The wind pushed against the building. Somewhere down the walkway, something rattled. Then, from farther away now, I heard the metallic thud of the ice machine door. I waited another 10 seconds and cracked the curtain instead, peering through the narrow gap by the window. The walkway outside my room was empty. The yellow security light over the stairs buzzed softly. Snow moved in thin ribbons across the lot. No person, no shadow, no one stepping away. I stayed awake another hour after that before finally getting back to sleep. The next morning, I mentioned it to Norm in the office while he handed me a styrofoam cup of coffee that tasted vaguely like burnt paper. Somebody knocked on my door around 2, I said. He didn't look surprised. Probably another guest. I looked out. Nobody was there. He shrugged. Stormy night. Sound carries strange. Then he glanced past me toward the parking lot. You staying another night? Probably 2 if the interstate closes. His mouth tightened just a little. If you do, ask for a first floor room. That was such a specific thing to say that I actually laughed again. Why? He hesitated too long. Less windy, he said. That day I finished my inspection north of town and learned by noon that the interstate had indeed shut down in both directions because of drifting snow and a pileup 30 miles east. The motel was the only realistic option unless I wanted to gamble on secondary roads in worsening conditions, which I didn't. When I came back that evening, the lot looked even emptier than before. A snowplow had gone through once, but wind was already filling the tracks back in. 2 of the cars I'd seen the night before were gone. Another was now buried nearly to the wheel wells. Inside the office, Norm was watching weather coverage on a small TV mounted in the corner. He looked up when I came in, almost like he'd been expecting me. Still got 214? I asked. He glanced at the board, then at me. Could move you downstairs. It's fine. He rubbed a hand across his mustache. You hear anything last night besides a knocking? I stared at him. The ice machine, I said. Why? He leaned back in his chair and gave the kind of sigh people give when they're deciding whether to tell you something they'd rather avoid. Machine's been unplugged for 6 months, he said. I didn't say anything. It used to jam, he continued. Door got loose, started opening and shutting in the wind. Maintenance took a look, said the motor was shot. We unplugged it. But it's still doing it? He nodded. In the wind. That doesn't make sense if it's unplugged. Another shrug, but this one was strained. It's old. I remember feeling irritated more than scared. Tired, cold, stuck in a motel during a blizzard, listening to an old man feed me half explanations. I just want a practical answer. Has somebody been messing with it? I asked. No. You sure? Norm looked at me then, really looked at me. There used to be a woman who stayed up in 214 every winter, he said. Traveling pharmaceutical rep, nice lady. Mid-40s, I guess. Stayed a few nights every couple months because of the highway. 3 years in a row. One January night she called the office and said someone kept knocking on her door, but every time she looked, nobody was there. I stood very still. Norm continued, eyes on the counter now. She said she could hear the ice machine too. Said it sounded like someone opening and closing it over and over. What happened? She checked out the next morning. That's it? He nodded. I should have been relieved by that. Instead, it bothered me more because of the way he told it, like there was a part missing. What aren't you saying? I asked. Norm didn't answer right away. Finally, he said, she called me once more after she left. Asked if anyone had turned in a key. A key? To her room. I felt the back of my neck go cold. She said when she got home, her room key was in the side pocket of her suitcase. She kept it in her coat the whole stay. Swore she never put it there. That doesn't mean anything. No, Norm said quietly. It doesn't. I wish I had checked out then. I didn't, mostly because fear rarely arrives all at once in real life. It layers. There's always one more normal explanation available, and people cling to those much longer than they should. That night, I parked in nearly the same spot and carried my bag up through sharper wind and deeper cold. The second floor walkway was empty. The recessed alcove around the corner glowed yellow and hollow. The unplugged ice machine sat beside the vending machine like a metal locker. As I passed the corner, I looked directly at it. The machine door was closed. A strip of black felt marker across the front read out of order in thick, faded handwriting. I went into my room, locked the door, shoved a chair under the handle. Not because I was truly scared, I told myself, but because motels are motels and extra security never hurts. At 10:30, the machine started again. Thud, pause, thud. The sound carried through the wall and down the walkway, perfectly spaced, perfectly hollow. I muted the TV and listened. After the fifth or sixth time, I got annoyed enough to call the office. Norm answered on the second ring. It's doing it again, I said. I know. You can hear from there? A pause. Yes. Can you make it stop? Another pause. No. Something about that single word bothered me enough that I asked, why not? This time the silence stretched so long, I thought maybe the line had gone dead. Then Norm said, because if I go out there and close it, it'll start on your floor instead. I stared at the phone. What does that mean? But he'd already hung up. I did not sleep much after that. Around 1 a.m., I heard footsteps on the walkway outside. Slow, measured, not passing by, stopping and starting, as if whoever it was moving from door to door. A soft knock sounded somewhere down the row. Then another. Then, after a gap, one directly next to my room. I sat upright in bed, barely breathing. One more knock came, this time from my door. 3 taps, same as the night before. I called out, who is it? Nothing. I got out of bed and moved the window as quietly as I could, expecting to see someone stepping away. The walkway was empty. Snow moved past in fine white streaks. The yellow light near the stairs flickered. Then I noticed something at the far corner near the ice machine. The machine door was standing open, not swinging, held open, and in the dark gap behind it, where the ice would have been, I could see part of face. At first, I honestly thought it was some visual mistake, a trick of shadow and yellow light. Then the face moved slightly forward, and I saw an eye reflecting the light from the walkway. I jerked back from the window, so fast I hit the wall. Every part of me was suddenly awake in a way I had never experienced before. Not panic exactly. Something cleaner and colder. Total certainty that I was in danger. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. The dispatcher picked up, and I began explaining too fast. Motel, second floor, possible intruder, someone hiding near my room. While I was talking, 3 more knocks sounded on the door. The dispatcher heard them. "Are you alone in the room?" she asked. "Yes." "Is the door locked?" "Yes." "Stay on the line. Officers are on the way." The knock stopped. Then, very gently, the handle turned. The chair under it shifted with a tiny scrape. I backed up toward the bathroom, heart slamming so hard my chest hurt. The handle turned again, slower this time, testing the resistance. Then it stopped. Seconds passed. Then I heard something that bothered me even more than the knocking. A card key being slid into the lock. A soft electronic chirp. The handle pushed down. The chair jammed harder into place and held. I remember making a noise then, not words, just raw panic. The dispatcher was asking me something, but I could barely hear. Another key swipe, another chirp. The person outside had a working key. The chair jumped once under a hard shove. Then again, I ran into the bathroom, locked that door too, and stood with my back against it. It was an interior motel bathroom with no window, just buzzing light and stained tile and a mirror that made me look pale and unreal. Outside in the room, the door finally burst inward. The chair clattered across the carpet. The dispatcher was telling me officers were there. They were pulling in now. Stay where I was. Announce myself if I heard them. Footsteps crossed the room. Slowly. Not hurried. Not rummaging. Coming toward the bathroom. I don't think I was breathing at all by then. The footsteps stopped right outside the door. Then, in a man's voice so calm it almost sounded polite, someone said, "You can come out. I'm motel staff." I said nothing. A hand touched the knob once. Then there was sudden shouting outside, loud, sharp, male voices from the walkway, and the footsteps retreated fast across the room. A second later, I heard a body hit the exterior railing outside and someone yelling to get on the ground. By the time I came out, 2 officers had a man face down on the concrete walkway just past my room. He was in his 50s, wearing motel maintenance coveralls under a winter coat. I recognized him immediately, though I hadn't seen enough of the face in the ice machine alcove to know at the time. It was Norm, or rather, it was who I thought was Norm. The actual motel owner, whose first name really was Norman, had died the previous summer. The man at the desk had been his brother-in-law, Curtis, helping temporarily with the property while it sat in probate and barely stayed open. According to police, Curtis had access to all the room keys, had been living in one of the closed units in the back, and had been entering vacant rooms for months, sometimes staying in them. He also had a history of harassment complaints from another county. When officers searched the unplugged ice machine compartment, they found blankets, cigarette butts, snack wrappers, and a folding stool positioned so someone could sit inside the empty machine, housed with the front door cracked open from within. It faced directly down the second floor walkway, toward room 214. I thought that would be the worst part. It wasn't. The worst part came later, when one of the officers asked whether I had left my suitcase unzipped that afternoon. I told him yes. Probably. Why? He held up my room key card and an evidence bag. "I think this is yours," he said. I reached automatically for my coat pocket. Empty. I checked the table beside the bed, where I was sure I'd set it earlier. Nothing. He told me they'd found it in the bathroom sink. I had not put it there. I know I hadn't, which meant sometime before I called 911. While I was in the room listening to the ice machine and thinking the threat was outside, he had likely already been inside once. Maybe while I was downstairs. Maybe while I was at dinner. Maybe while I was showering. Maybe just before the knocking started. I checked out before sunrise and drove south the minute the highway reopened. Even though the roads were still terrible, I never found out whether that pharmaceutical rep Norm mentioned had really just misplaced her key, or whether Curtis had been doing the same thing back then, practicing on people who were too tired or embarrassed to insist something was wrong. But I've stayed in a lot of hotels since then, and there are still certain things I can't ignore. A room at the far end of an exterior walkway. an employee who seems too interested in whether you're alone, a broken machine outside a room making the same sound over and over, and especially this: if someone working a front desk tells you not to go wandering at night, pay attention to whether they sound concerned for you or concerned about being seen. When I was 31, I took a temporary facilities job in an office park outside Milwaukee during one of the worst winters I can remember. It was supposed to be easy work. The company that hired me managed maintenance for a cluster of low-rise office buildings that sat on the edge of an industrial area, the kind of place that felt active from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. and then immediately turned into a dead zone. During the day, it was delivery trucks, badge access doors, coffee carts, and people in business casual carrying laptops through slush. At night, it was black windows, sodium parking lot lights, and miles of wind pushing snow across empty lots. I was between permanent jobs at the time, and the pay was better than what I'd been making. So I took the night shift for 3 months. My responsibilities were simple: check heating systems, reset alarms, salt entryways, deal with minor maintenance issues, and make sure no one got locked in or tried to sleep in conference rooms after hours. Most nights were boring. By the second week, I had a routine. Start in building A, then B, then C, and finish at D, which was the oldest of 4 and had been partly vacant since a medical billing company downsized a year before. D was always the worst one to close. Half the offices were empty. A few hallways had motion sensor lights that never seemed calibrated right, and the HVAC system made noises that could convince you someone was moving around long after everyone had gone home. Even then, I preferred D last because once I finished there, my shift was almost over. The first strange thing happened during a storm in early January. That afternoon, the weather had gotten ugly fast. Heavy snow, hard wind, bad visibility. By 6 p.m., most tenants had gone home. By 7:30, the roads were getting bad enough that the property manager called and asked if I could stay late in case the exterior doors iced up or the overnight cleaning crew had trouble getting in. I said yes because I wanted the overtime. Around 9:15, I was in Building C replacing a flickering bulb in a stairwell when my radio crackled. It was Linda, the property manager. "Have you done D yet?" "Not yet," I said. A pause. Then, "When you do, make sure the 4th floor is clear." I held the ladder steady with one hand and the radio with the other. "4th floor?" "Yeah, that floor is empty." Another pause. "Just check it anyway." I remember lowering the radio and looking at it for a second. The 4th floor of D had been vacant for months. Everyone knew that. One accounting firm had moved out in October, and since then the entire floor had been dark except for emergency lighting and a few offices being used for storage. I should have asked more questions. Instead, I just said, "Okay." By 10:10, the snow was coming down so hard the parking lot lights looked fog over. The cleaning crew texted to say they weren't coming. Linda went home. That left me alone on the property. I drove my little maintenance cart across the lot to Building D, signed into panel, and went through the usual checklist. Lobby door secure. 1st floor vacant. Boiler room normal. 2nd floor clear. 3rd floor clear. Then I took the elevator to 4. The doors opened onto darkness. Not total darkness. There were red exit signs at either end of the hall, and a strip of emergency lighting low on the walls, but enough that the floor looked abandoned in a way the others didn't. The carpet was still there. The suite numbers were still on the doors, and someone had left a potted plant by the elevator months earlier that was now brown and collapsed into itself. I stepped out and listened. Nothing. The floor was set up in a square loop with offices and conference rooms around the outside and cubicle space in the middle. My flashlight caught empty reception desks, stacks of moving boxes, and plastic sheeting taped over one glass wall where a crack had never been repaired. I did a slow walk around the perimeter. No voices, no movement, no obvious sign anyone had been there. I was about to get back on the elevator when I noticed that one office door near the northwest corner was closed. That doesn't sound important, except every other interior office door on that floor had been propped open for months to keep the air circulating. This one was fully shut. On the frosted glass beside it, I could still make out the old vinyl lettering. Northfield Revenue Group. I tried the handle. Locked. I shined my flashlight to a narrow gap where the blinds didn't quite meet and saw what looked like a desk, a filing cabinet, and a chair pulled out slightly. Nothing else. I went downstairs, wrote fourth floor clear in my log, and forgot about it for the rest of the night. At 12:47 a.m., the fire alarm panel in building D threw a motion alert for the fourth floor. Not smoke, not heat, motion. I stared at the panel because I actually thought it was malfunctioning. The floor was vacant. No cleaning crew, no tenants, no reason for anyone to be there. I reset it. 30 seconds later, it triggered again. Fourth floor, northwest quadrant. Same area as the locked office. I grabbed my radio and called Linda even though I knew she'd be annoyed. She answered sounding half asleep. What? I'm getting motion alerts on 4 and D. Silence. Then, from where? Northwest side. Another pause, longer this time. Finally, she said, probably a sensor fault. It triggered twice. They do that in bad weather. That sounded possible, but something in her voice bothered me. Not fear exactly. More like she'd already decided what I was supposed to believe. I checked it earlier. I said, there was one office closed up there. Do you know why? She let out a slow breath. No. You sure? Yes. But it came too fast. I should have left it alone. Instead, because I was tired and irritated and alone in a snowstorm and didn't like being lied to, I took the elevator back to 4. This time when the doors opened, I could hear something. A phone ringing. Very faint. Somewhere down the hall. I stepped out and the sound stopped. That gave me such an immediate, physical chill that I nearly hit the elevator button again right then. Offices don't ring on empty floors after midnight. Not old desk phones in disconnected suites. Not unless someone is there. I moved slowly down the hall, flashlight in one hand and the building master key ring in the other. The northwest office door was still closed. As I got closer, I noticed light under it. Not bright light, just a thin amber line at the bottom like from a desk lamp. I stood there listening so hard it made my ears strain. Nothing. Then from inside, I heard a chair leg scrape once across the floor. I stepped back immediately and pulled the radio up. Linda. No answer. I tried again. Linda, answer. Only static. I thought about calling 911. I really did. But what exactly was I going to say? I'm in an office park, and I think someone's inside a locked suite that technically belongs to no one? Maybe that would have been enough. Maybe not. At the time, it felt too thin, too explainable. So I did the thing I still hate myself for doing. I used the master key. The lock opened with a click that sounded much too loud. I pushed the door inward and swept the flashlight across the room. Empty desk, empty chair, filing cabinets, dry air, dust, no lamp, no person. The room smelled stale, like paper and heat. I took one step inside, and the motion lights in the outer hall shut off behind me, leaving only my flashlight and the dim red spill from the exit sign to the frosted glass. I turned immediately, annoyed now more than scared, and walked back to the door. That was when I saw the second door. It was behind the reception desk, painted the same beige as the wall, and mostly hidden by shadow. No window, no suite map indication, just a narrow door with an old silver knob. I hadn't noticed it from the hall, and it was standing open by maybe 2 inches. I hit the flashlight on it. Inside was darkness. The kind of dark that doesn't look like an office, more like a crawl space or storage void. My first thought was maintenance access. Old buildings always had weird service spaces. My second thought came because the room I was standing in was too quiet. Not empty quiet, held quiet, like someone behind that door knew I was there. I backed out of the office and pulled the door mostly shut, then got on the radio again. Linda, I'm calling the police if you don't answer me. This time she came back immediately. Don't do that. The speed of it made my stomach drop. Why not? Silence. Linda. Then, in a voice that was suddenly very awake, she said, go downstairs. Lock yourself in the management office. I'm on my way. What is on this floor? No answer. What is in that office? Still nothing. Then she said something that made my hands go numb. That room should be boarded shut. I didn't ask another question. I turned for the elevator just as something moved in the hall behind me. Not a full person stepping out. More like the edge of a figure crossing the intersection at the end of the corridor fast enough to vanish between one sweep of my flashlight and the next. I froze. Then came a sound from the office I had just opened. A quiet exhale. Not mine. I ran for the elevator. The button felt mushy under my thumb. The doors took too long. Every second they stayed open felt unbearable because the corridor behind me was reflected dimly in the stainless steel door frame, and I couldn't stop glancing at it. Something dark moved in the reflection. The doors closed. I hit lobby so hard my thumb hurt. When the elevator reached the first floor, I got out and locked myself in the management office exactly like Linda had said. It was a small room off the lobby with cameras, tenant files, and a door solid enough to make me feel only slightly less exposed. I called Linda on my cell. She answered on the first ring. What's going on? I said. I could hear her windshield wipers in the background. I should have handled it already, she said. That doesn't answer me. A long pause. Then she said, there's a man staying up there. I stared at the closed office door in front of me. What do you mean staying up there? Back in November, one of the cleaning women reported food wrappers and a blanket in a storage room. Security checked and found signs someone had been sleeping in an unused interior records room in the old Northfield suite. You called the police? Yes. And they searched, didn't find him. I felt genuinely sick. So you knew there was someone in the building? We thought he was gone. You thought? She exhaled shakily. A week later, another tenant came in early and said she heard someone in one of the empty restrooms on 4. Then one of the vending machines was emptied overnight. Then we found signs. What signs? Another pause. Someone had been moving between vacant suites through the ceiling access panels. I put a hand over my mouth without thinking. And you still kept the building open? We changed locks. We sealed what we found. We hired overnight patrol for a while. For a while, nothing happened after Christmas. I almost laughed from disbelief. Nothing happened after Christmas, as if that meant the problem had expired. What room should be boarded shut? I asked. The records room, she said quietly. There's an old file archive behind that office. No windows. One way in. We had maintenance cover it after they found bedding in there. I thought about the narrow hidden door standing slightly open. Linda, I said, and my voice came out thin. It wasn't shut. There was silence on the line. Then, stay where you are. As if on cue, one of the lobby cameras beeped. I turned in the chair toward the monitor. 4th floor stairwell door. Open. I hadn't used the stairs. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then a man stepped into view on the grainy black and white feed. He was tall and thin, wearing what looked like an old maintenance jacket over layers of dark clothing. His face was difficult to make out in the overhead camera angle, but he moved in a way that told me instantly he was comfortable in that building, not searching, navigating. He didn't hurry. He walked down the hall toward the elevator. I made a noise Linda heard through the phone. What? He's on the camera. Where? 4th floor. The man stopped outside the elevator. He tilted his head up directly toward the camera. Then he smiled. It wasn't a wild expression. That would have been easier to process. It was small and knowing, like he'd just caught someone in a mistake. The screen flickered, then went black. At the same exact moment, the lights in the management office went out. The backup emergency strip kicked on a second later, washing the room in red. My whole body went cold. I could hear Linda still talking on the phone, but more distant now because I had stood up without realizing it. Are you there? Are you there? Then came the ding of the elevator arriving in the lobby, not opening near me. The management office had no direct line of sight to the elevator bank, but close enough that I heard the doors slide apart. Silence followed. No footsteps, which was somehow worse than hearing them. I whispered into the phone, "He's down here." Linda said, "Police are coming. 5 minutes." 5 minutes did not sound like a real amount of time. I locked the management office door, then looked around for something I could use as a weapon. There was a heavy 3-hole punch, a letter opener, a flashlight, and a fire extinguisher. I took the extinguisher. The silence outside the office stretched long enough that part of me started to believe maybe he'd gone another direction. Then the doorknob moved, very slowly, once to the left, then to the right. The metal latch gave a soft click, but held. I took one step backward. A man's voice came through the door, older than I expected, calm, almost conversational. "You're not supposed to lock that after midnight." I didn't say anything. He tapped once on the glass pane wired into the upper part of the door, a narrow pane I hadn't even been thinking about until that moment. "I know Linda's in the car," he said. Every hair on my arm stood up. She always drives too fast when it snows. I backed farther into the room, dragging a filing cabinet silently toward the door because it was the only thing heavy enough to matter. From the other side, he said, "You should leave before she gets here." There are certain ways people talk that tell you they've been rehearsing conversations in their head for a long time. That was what frightened me most. He didn't sound frantic or unstable. He sounded familiar with the situation, familiar with her, familiar with the building, familiar with how people reacted. My voice came out before I fully decided to speak. "Who are you?" He laughed once under his breath. That was all. Then, "I used to work here." I kept pulling the cabinet. He continued, "Before they locked my tools inside, before they told everyone I quit, I thought about the old maintenance jacket, the ceiling access panels, the hidden records room. How long have you been in this building?" I asked. No answer. Then I heard him lean closer to glass because his voice changed slightly. "She knows." I didn't know whether he meant Linda knew he was there now, or had known all along, or knew something about him she'd never told anyone. I didn't want to know. I just wanted police to arrive before he decided to stop talking. Instead, he did something worse. He knocked again, lightly this time, and said, "Check the cabinet under the west camera monitor." I didn't move. "Go ahead," he said. "She forgot to shred them." I hate that I listened. I hate that curiosity still works even when terror should cancel out. Without taking my eyes off the door, I reached the low cabinet under the security monitors and yanked it open. Inside was a stack of old tenant folders, maintenance invoices, and one thick envelope with no label. I opened it. Photographs slid halfway out. Interior building photos. 4th floor, the Northfield suite. Some were close-ups of the hidden records room before it was sealed. Blankets, canned food, extension cords, a portable radio, prescription bottles. Others showed something else. Damage, not vandalism, not random mess. A folding chair positioned beside an interior office window looking into a women's restroom corridor. A ceiling tile removed above a conference room. And in one photograph, partially obscure at the edge of the frame, Linda herself standing in the suite while a uniformed security guard looked the other way. My stomach turned. There was a note clipped to the photos in Linda's handwriting. "Do not send to police yet. Review liability exposure first." The voice outside the door said very softly now, "I told her." I looked at the door. She said it would ruin the property. It clicked then, horribly and all at once. This wasn't a man nobody knew about. This was a man who'd been found, at least in part, and treated as a problem to manage quietly instead of urgently. Maybe she called security. Maybe she tried to seal him out. Maybe she convinced herself it was contained. Whatever version of events she'd been living with, it had not involved protecting the night maintenance guy who got stuck alone in the building during a snowstorm. The doorknob moved again, harder this time. Then the first impact hit the door. Not enough to break it, just enough to shake the frame and tell me the conversation part was ending. I raised the extinguisher with both hands. A second hit came. The wire glass shivered. Then from outside, over the wind and the pounding of my ears, I heard a new sound. Sirens. Distant but real. The man at the door went still. I heard one step backward, then another, then running, not toward the lobby, toward the stairwell. By the time police got inside, he was gone. They searched the building top to bottom. They found the reopened records room on 4. Fresh food wrappers, a battery lantern, blankets, a narrow path through ceiling spaces connecting 3 vacant suites, a backpack with tools, and In a fifth-floor mechanical void accessible only by maintenance ladder, a nest of sorts where it apparently hidden during previous searches. They never found him that night, or the next day, or the week after. Linda was suspended almost immediately, then fired. I heard later there were lawsuits from former tenants once news began to spread. The company settled quietly with at least one woman who claimed she'd been watched in the building months earlier. As for me, I quit within 48 hours. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. 3 weeks later, after another storm, I was in the parking lot of a grocery store loading bags into my trunk when I noticed a man standing beyond the cart return under the edge of the lot lights. Tall, thin, maintenance jacket, watching. By the time I really focused on him, a car passed between us and he was gone. Maybe it wasn't him. That's the sentence I've used for 2 years now. Maybe it wasn't him. But sometimes during heavy snow, when wind pushes against windows in long dry bursts, I think about the way he smiled into that security camera on the 4th floor. Not like someone cornered, more like someone amused that other people were only just realizing he'd been part of the building much longer than they had. And the thing that still bothers me most isn't that he was there. It's that on some level, other people knew. Not enough to stop him. Not enough to warn anyone properly. Just enough to label the office doors, adjust the paperwork, and hope the next person on night shift never had reason to open the wrong room. In the winter of 2022, I took a contract job at a regional hospital in Minnesota doing overnight imaging transport. It sounds more important than it was. I was 33, between permanent jobs, and a staffing agency had placed me at St. Alden Regional for 12 weeks to help move adult patients between the emergency department, radiology, and inpatient floors during a stretch when the hospital was short-staffed. I wasn't a nurse, not a paramedic, not anyone making medical decisions. My job was simple. Push stretchers, wheel chairs, deliver paperwork, move equipment when they needed another set of hands, and mostly stay out of the way. The hours were 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. At first, I liked the routine of it. The hospital at night felt like a separate world from the day shift version. Same building, different personality. The public areas got quieter. The lights dimmed in the outer corridors. You go from a bright nurse station full of alarms and voices into some side hallway where the floor buffer had just passed and the silence felt thick. The campus was spread across several connected buildings, some modern and some older. The main tower had been renovated a few times, but one wing on the east side was still mostly original from the late 70s. It was scheduled for full demolition eventually, but in the meantime it held storage rooms and used offices, a physical therapy gym that only operated days, and an old outpatient imaging suite that had been closed for over a year. The east wing also connected to a detached employee parking garage by an enclosed skyway on the 2nd floor. That skyway mattered because in winter nobody wanted to cross the open lot at 3 a.m. with wind coming off the river. Staff parked in the garage, came in through badge access, and used the skyway to reach the hospital. I used it too. Most nights, around 6:45 a.m., after shift report, I'd walk that skyway half asleep with my backpack over one shoulder, past the big windows facing the frozen river, and head down to the 3rd level of the garage where agency staff usually park because the lower levels fill first. It was never pleasant, but it was normal. Then there was the storm. The weather had been getting worse all evening. Hard wind, dry blowing snow, temperatures below zero even before wind chill. By midnight, the roads were bad enough that elective appointments for the next morning were already being canceled. By 2 a.m., administration had started asking if some staff might need to sleep in unused on-call rooms because plows couldn't keep up with the county roads outside town. Inside the hospital, though, things still moved. People still needed scans. The emergency department still filled. A place like that doesn't stop because the weather gets ugly. It just gets more sealed off from the world. Around 4:10 a.m., I was sitting near radiology finishing lukewarm coffee when one of the CT techs, a woman named Dana, asked if I could bring a portable oxygen cylinder down to the old East Wing storage room. Why there? I asked. She shrugged. Facilities asked. They're shifting some overflow equipment. That seemed odd because nobody used that wing overnight unless they had to. Still, it wasn't my job to question every request. I took the cylinder onto a cart and headed that way. The difference between the active hospital and the East Wing was immediate. The main corridors had polished floors, updated signage, and enough people moving around to keep you from feeling alone. The East Connector hallway was narrower, dimmer, and colder by several degrees. Not freezing, but cool enough that you noticed it through your scrubs. Half the ceiling lights had been changed to motion sensor LEDs, so sections stayed dim until you entered them. The walls were older too. Cream paint, scuffed corners, metal handrails polished by decades of use. At the far end, just before the old outpatient imaging suite, there was a storage room with a keypad lock that facilities used. Dana had given me the temporary code over the phone. I punched it in, opened the door, rolled the oxygen tank inside, and stopped. The room was already full. Not full of equipment, full of personal things. Blankets, plastic grocery bags, water bottles, a microwave on the floor, extension cords, a folding chair, a battery lantern. There was also a neat stack of adult-sized winter clothing against the wall and a pair of boots set side by side near a space heater. I backed out and shut the door immediately. The first explanation my brain offered was that facility staff were sheltering there between jobs during the storm. Maybe maintenance, maybe security. But the room didn't look like a break area. It looked lived in. I called Dana and told her what I found. She was quiet for half a second too long. Then she said, "Bring the tank back." "Whose stuff is in there?" "I don't know. You sent me there. I was told to." "By who?" Another pause. "Just bring it back." When people answer like that in a hospital, you learn something fast. They know more than they want to say, and they have reasons not to say it over phone. I brought the tank back. At 5:30, the hospital announced the parking garage shuttle would stop running after 7 because of the weather. That mostly affected people coming in, not leaving, but it still made everyone tense. Nurses were calling relatives, trying to see who could pick them up. One respiratory therapist was already planning to sleep in a recliner in an unused lounge. I asked the security officer near the emergency department whether the East Wing storage room was being used by maintenance. He looked at me strangely. "What room?" I told him. He said, "Nobody should be in there." I almost laughed. "Well, somebody is." He said he'd check it. When I asked him later, near the end of shift, he told me the door had been locked and the room was empty when he got there. That should have made me feel better. Instead, it made my stomach drop, because I knew what I had seen. Not a little clutter, not a forgotten coat. Someone had been set up in that room long enough to make it orderly. Shift change was messy because of the storm. Some days staff were late. Others had called out. I ended up staying until almost 7:20, helping move a patient back from MRI. By the time I finally got my coat on, the sky outside the second floor windows was at flat dark blue right before sunrise, and the snow was still coming sideways across the river. The hospital intercom had announced 3 times that anyone driving should use extreme caution and consider delaying departure if possible. All I wanted was to get to my car and go home. The East Skyway was almost empty. That alone was unusual. Normally around shift change, there would be nurses, lab staff, dietary workers, maybe a few residents moving through in clumps, all tired and fast walking. That morning, I saw only one environmental services worker far ahead near the garage doors, and by the time I reached the midpoint windows, even he was gone. The skyway was long enough that once you were in the middle, you could feel suspended between the garage and the hospital. On one side were tall windows facing the river and service road. On the other side, smaller windows looked down onto a narrow strip between buildings where plowed snow had piled into dirty frozen walls. I had just passed the midpoint when I heard footsteps behind me. Not unusual in itself, but they were close enough that I should have heard the door open at the hospital end. I hadn't. I glanced at the glass beside me, using the reflection instead of turning around fully. A man in dark winter clothes was walking about 20 feet behind me. I remember thinking first that he was probably staff. Then I noticed he had no badge visible, no scrubs, no hospital jacket, nothing identifiable at all, just a dark knit cap, heavy coat, jeans, and gloves. There are plenty of reasons a visitor might dress like that, But visitors weren't usually wandering the employee garage skyway at shift change during a blizzard, and he wasn't carrying anything. No bag, no coffee, no keys in hand. He was just walking, same pace as me. I sped up slightly. So, did he? That could still be coincidence. Then I reached the garage door and pulled my badge from my pocket. Before I tapped it, I made the mistake of glancing back directly. He stopped the moment I looked at him. Just stood there in the middle of the skyway. Average height, maybe 40s or 50s. Face mostly hidden by the cap and the raised collar of his coat. Totally still. I badged into the garage quickly and let the heavy door close behind me. For a second I felt stupid. Maybe he was waiting for access. Maybe he was going to ask me to hold the door, and I'd acted paranoid for nothing. Then the door handle moved from the other side. Once. Then again, harder. I backed away from it. The garage was concrete and echoing, and much colder than the hospital. My car was on level 3, one floor up. The stairwell was to my left. The elevator was farther down and never worth waiting for. The door handle stopped moving. Then the narrow wire glass window in the door darkened as the man stepped closer to it. He didn't knock. He didn't gesture. He just stood on the other side of the glass and looked in. I turned and went for stairs. My footsteps bounced weirdly in the empty garage. Snow blew through the open outer slats in fine powder, skittering across the concrete. I kept telling myself to calm down, that once I was in my car with the doors locked, it would be over. Halfway up to level 3, I heard the skyway door downstairs open, then the slow metallic clang of it shutting. He had gotten in somehow. I stopped on the landing and listened. No voices, no other footsteps. Then, from below me in the stairwell, a single step, very measured. Then another, coming up. I ran. I went through the level 3 door and out into the road where I'd parked. My car was near the far wall, partly crusted in drifted snow. I hit the unlock button while moving, threw my backpack into the passenger seat, and got inside. The second I locked the doors, some part of my brain expected him to appear at the window. He didn't. I started the engine, turned on the defroster, and looked toward the stairwell door. Nothing. I told myself maybe it was someone else entirely coming up with their own car, and I'd turn a tired brain and a bad storm into a threat. Then the back passenger side door handle lifted. I twisted around so fast, I nearly hit the steering wheel. The handle lifted once more, slowly. Someone was standing just outside my blind spot. I threw the car into reverse without even scraping all the windows first. The tires spun, then caught. As I backed out, a man stepped into view beside the rear quarter panel. Same coat, same cap. He moved back just enough to avoid being clipped, then stood there watching me. No anger, no surprise, just watching. I gunned it toward the exit ramp. At the gate arm, I had to stop long enough for the sensor to read my pass. In those seconds, I looked in the rear view mirror and saw him walking, not running, down the lane behind me, toward the ramp. I hit the gas the moment the arm lifted. The roads were awful. I should have gone home. Instead, I circled the block and parked in a snow-packed urgent care lot across from the hospital, where I could see the garage entrance from a distance. I sat there with the heat blasting, trying to decide if I just overreacted to some random person who'd wanted into the garage. Then I saw him come out, not through the main garage vehicle exit, through a side service door at the ground level of the east wing. He looked both ways, tucked his head against the wind, and disappeared along the building line toward the older part of the campus. Not the garage, not the public entrance, the hospital. I called security from my car and told them exactly what happened. The officer who answered sounded skeptical until I mentioned the east wing service door. Then his tone changed and he asked me to stay on the line. He transferred me to a supervisor. That supervisor asked whether I had seen the man's face clearly. I said no. He asked whether the man wore hospital clothing. I said no. He asked where exactly I had seen him first. When I said the East Skyway, there was a pause, so long I checked my phone to see if the call had dropped. Then he said, "Please don't leave the area yet." That was an insane request to hear when I had just spent 12 hours working and nearly freezing, but I stayed. About 10 minutes later, I saw 2 security vehicles pull around the side access road. Another few minutes after that, the supervisor came out to my car himself. He was a broad guy named Fletcher I'd seen a few times overnight, but never really spoken to. He got in the passenger seat without asking, which immediately told me this was serious enough that he didn't care about formalities. He asked me to describe the man again. I did. Then I said, "Who is he?" Fletcher stared through the windshield for a second before answering. "We've had reports," he said. "Reports of what?" "Someone being in places they shouldn't be." That was such a careful phrase that it made me angry. "In the hospital?" He nodded. "How long?" He didn't answer immediately. "Since the first cold snap," he said. "That was almost 2 months." I looked at him. "And nobody told staff?" "We didn't know for sure it was the same person." "What does that mean?" He rubbed a gloved hand over his mouth. "It started with food missing from break rooms in the East Wing. Then a volunteer said she saw someone in an old patient transport jacket using the staff stairwell after midnight. Then facilities found signs someone had been sleeping in a closed rehab room for at least a few nights." I thought about the storage room with the blankets. "You mean living there temporarily?" "That's not what temporarily looks like." He didn't argue. I asked the question that mattered most. "Has he hurt anyone?" Fletcher looked out at the snow for a few seconds before saying, "No assaults reported." Reported. That word did not help. He continued, "But there have been interactions. People followed to their cars. Unauthorized badge attempts. One employee found a note in her locker asking what level she parked on. My entire back tightened against the seat. And you still didn't warn people?" "We increased patrols." "That's not what I asked." He didn't answer that either. Instead, he said, "I need you to understand something. If you see him again inside, do not approach him. Do not let him follow you into secure areas. And don't ever assume he can't get somewhere just because it's badge access." That last sentence landed badly. "What do you mean?" Fletcher turned to me then. "We think he may have been getting into the garage skyway by waiting near the East Rehab Service corridor when employees badge through from the inside. He doesn't have a valid hospital badge, but he knows the movement patterns." "How would he know that?" Another pause. "He used to work here." Everything inside me seemed to go still. "In what?" "Patient transport. The same department I was covering." That explained too much all at once. The old transport jacket, the staff hallways, the compace, the way he moved like he belonged there. Why did he leave? Fletcher looked away. Terminated. "For what?" He opened the car door. "You should go home," he said. That was the end of the conversation. Officially, but it wasn't the end of what happened. I did go home. I slept badly. When I woke up that evening, I had 2 missed calls from the agency and 1 from the hospital. I called the hospital first. The nursing supervisor told me they were advising non-essential contract staff not to report until weather improved. She said it in a way that sounded half true. Then she added, "Security may want a follow-up statement later." I asked if they found him. She said only they're reviewing footage. I almost didn't go back the next night, but the roads reopened and I needed the money, and part of me did not want Fear to decide things that quickly. When I came in, Dana, the CT tech, saw my face and asked, "You okay?" I said, "Did you know someone's been living in the East Wing?" She froze for half a beat. Then she said, "Everybody knows something's wrong over there." That answer bothered me more than if she denied it. Around 1 a.m., I had to take paperwork down to records in the basement. On the way back, I passed a transport break room and noticed a new keypad installed on the door. Inside, 2 employees were talking in low voices. One of them, a respiratory therapist I knew only as Leon, looked at me and said, "You're the one from the garage, right?" That was how I learned the story staff had been trading quietly for weeks. A former transporter named Carl had been fired late in the fall after repeated complaints about being in closed units without authorization, using old master keys he was supposed to turn in, and lingering around female staff in stairwells and garage levels after shift change. Security had walked him out. Supposedly that was it, except people started seeing him after that. First on hospital property, then inside the Skyway, then in empty waiting rooms near areas he used to work. Every time someone raised it formally, Security either couldn't find him or said the footage was inconclusive. So staff started doing what people always do in institutions, adjusting quietly, walking in groups, changing routes, not taking the E stairwell alone. I asked the obvious question, why didn't anyone tell me? Leon looked embarrassed. We thought agency probably got briefed. They hadn't. At 6:40 a.m., near the end of that shift, I made what I still consider the worst decision of the whole experience. I took the East Skyway again. I could tell myself I did it because the weather was better and security had said patrols were increased. The real reason was pride. I did not want to let some former employee reroute my life after one encounter. The Skyway was busy that morning. A few nurses ahead of me, a lab guy behind me on his phone. That helped until the lab guy peeled off at the first stair access, and the nurses badged through into the garage before I reached them, leaving me alone again for the last stretch. Halfway across, I saw something on the windowsill, a folded hospital transport slip, those little carbon copy forms they use internally. I should have kept walking. Instead, I picked it up. On the back, in neat block letters, was written, "You took my shuttle." For a second, I couldn't move. Then I heard a voice behind me, close enough to make every muscle in my back lock. That route was mine. I turned. He was standing at the hospital end door, maybe 30 feet away. Same coat, same cap, but now I saw his face clearly for the first time. Mid-50s, pale from cold, tired eyes, clean-shaven, not wild-looking, not disheveled enough to match the months people said he'd been slipping through closed spaces. He looked disturbingly ordinary, like someone's uncle, like someone who might ask for directions in a store. That made it much worse. He wasn't holding a weapon. He wasn't yelling. He just stood there in a narrow skyway with snow blowing white beyond the glass and said, in a calm, almost offended tone, "They gave you my floors too." I backed up. He took one step forward. I said, "Stay back." He actually smiled a little at that. You don't even know the blind hallways yet. Then he lifted one hand and tapped the glass beside him. I do. I don't remember deciding to run, but I ran toward the garage, so hard my backpack bounced off my shoulders. Behind me, I heard him start moving too, not sprinting, just coming after me quickly. I hit the garage door with my badge, got through, and shoved it closed behind me. This time I didn't go to my car. I went straight to the blue emergency phone mounted on the concrete pillar and hit the button. By the time security arrived, he was gone again, but not before they found one more thing. Inside the stairwell between the Skyway and garage, tucked behind the fire hose cabinet on the landing, they found a rolled blanket, bottled water, a flashlight, and an old employee shuttle schedule from before the parking routes changed. He had been spending time in there, maybe waiting, maybe listening, maybe learning which people left alone, at what hours, and from which units. I quit 2 days later. The agency tried to talk me into transferring to another hospital in the same system. I said no. St. Alden eventually sent an email saying the former employee had been formally trespassed and additional security measures were in place. It sounded polished and legal and several weeks too late. I still think about one thing Fletcher said in my car. Don't assume he can't get somewhere just because it's badge access. That was the lesson, really. Not that a hospital was unsafe in general. Not that every empty corridor hid something. It was that people inside large institutions start relying on systems more than awareness. Doors beep, cameras blink, badges scan, reports get filed, and everyone begins believing those things are protection instead of just records of what already happened. What bothered me most wasn't that Carl had been in the hospital after he was fired. It was how many people had adjusted around him before anyone truly stopped him. Years later, I still park near lights whenever I can. I don't use enclosed garage stairwells if I can avoid them. And if someone walks behind me at the exact same pace for too long, I let them pass or I turn around and make it obvious I see them. Because sometimes the most disturbing people are the ones who don't need to chase you. They already know where you're going. Evan was 32, divorced, and 6 months into the kind of isolation people romanticized until they actually lived it. The cabin had belonged to his uncle, who died the previous spring and left Evan the place because no one else wanted it. It sat in northern Minnesota at the end of a private road that wasn't really a road so much as two parallel tire ruts pressed through dense pine and birch. In summer, the area was probably beautiful. In winter, it felt like the edge of the world. Evan had told people he needed a reset. What he really needed was somewhere cheap. His remote IT contract work covered the basics, and the cabin had no mortgage, just a wood stove, a backup generator, a propane tank, and enough square footage to keep him from feeling boxed in. At least, that was what he thought in October, when he first moved in. By January, he'd learned that too much silence could feel like pressure. The nearest town was 35 minutes away in good conditions. With fresh snow, black ice, or wind, it might as well have been on another planet. Self-service came and went. The internet worked when it felt like it. The windows rattled every time the wind cut across the frozen lake behind the cabin. At night, the woods made sounds that were never loud enough to identify, just faint enough to let his imagination do the rest. Still, he'd adjusted. He had routines. Coffee at 6, check the generator and fuel cans, answer emails, split wood in the afternoon if the weather allowed, video calls with clients when the signal held, dinner, then a few hours with the TV or a book before bed. The first strange thing happened on a Thursday morning after a night of heavy snowfall. Evan opened the front door with a mug in his hand and stopped so fast some coffee splashed onto his wrist. There were footprints on the porch, not animal tracks, not snow drift patterns, boot prints. They came up the steps from the yard, crossed the porch from left to right, and stopped directly in front of the living room window. He stared at them for several seconds, waiting for the obvious explanation to appear. Maybe they were his from the day before, preserved under the overhang? But no, these were fresh. The snow packed into the tread was still sharp-edged. A little powder had blown into the grooves, but not enough to soften them. He set the mug down inside and crouched near the door. One set of prints. Large boots. Men's. Probably, though that didn't really mean anything. They had come from the side of the cabin, not the driveway. Whoever made them had walked past the front door, stopped at the window, and then continued around the far side of the porch. Evan looked up slowly at the dark trees. No movement, no car, no sound except wind nudging the pines together. He stepped outside, instantly aware of how stupid it was to be unarmed in a t-shirt and slippers. He went back inside, grabbed his coat, gloves, and the old baseball bat he kept near the entryway, then returned and followed the tracks. They went off the porch, around the cabin, and toward the lake. At the back wall, beneath the bedroom window, there was another pause. More compressed snow, more time spent standing still. Then the footprints continued down the slight slope toward the shoreline. About 20 yards out, where the snowdrifts deepened and the reeds stuck up in brittle clusters, the tracks simply ended. Evan stood there for nearly a full minute, bat in one hand, staring at the last visible print. The lake was frozen solid, but fresh snow covered the ice in a smooth, unbroken sheet. No continuation, no sign of a fall, no drag marks, no return tracks, just a line of boot prints leading from the woods around his house and out toward the lake until they abruptly stopped. He backed up, suddenly cold in a way the weather alone didn't explain. By noon, he convinced himself there had to be an answer. Wind-blown snow could hide tracks. The person might have doubled back in a way he missed. Maybe someone had been drunk, hunting, trespassing, whatever. Rural areas had weird people. He knew that. He also locked every window that afternoon and dragged a small bookcase in front of the back door. That night, he kept the porch light on. At around 1:40 in the morning, he woke to a dull sound from the front of the cabin. He opened his eyes and listened. Nothing. He almost rolled over and went back to sleep, but then came the sound again, a soft space tapping. Not frantic, not random. Tap, a few seconds. Tap, tap. Evan reached for his phone. No service. Of course. The bedroom was dark, except for the faint blue spill from the digital clock. He sat up, trying to separate the noises of the cabin from something outside it. The stove ticked quietly. Wind pressed against the siding. Then, again, tap, this time from the living room window. He got out of bed without turning on the lamp. For some reason, light felt wrong, like if he switched it on, he'd only make himself easier to see. He moved down the short hallway and stopped just before the living room, heart pounding hard enough to make him feel short of breath. The tapping came once more, very light, like a fingernail against glass. Evan crouched and slowly rose, just enough to see over the back of the couch and toward the front window. At first, he saw nothing but the porch light reflecting off the glass and a curtain of blowing snow beyond it. Then he noticed a shape, a person standing on the porch, just outside the brightest circle of the light. They weren't moving. They were close enough that he should have been able to make out details, but the hood of their coat cast a face in darkness. Evan froze. The figure lifted one hand and tapped the glass again. Polite, almost patient. Then it raised the other hand too and placed both palms flat against the window. Evan stumbled backward, so fast he hit the wall. By the time he grabbed the bat and forced himself to look again, the porch was empty. He switched on every light in the cabin, checked every lock twice, and spent the rest of the night in a kitchen chair with a bat across his lap and a hunting knife from the drawer beside him. Sunrise felt like something he had to survive to reach. The next morning, there were no footprints on the porch. That was somehow worse. He called the county sheriff's office once he got enough signal. The deputy he spoke to sounded tired before Evan even finished explaining. Could have been someone messing around. The man said, "You get snowmobilers, hunters, drifters. Did they try the door? No. Take anything? No. Damage anything? No." The deputy paused. "We can send somebody out, but with the weather and your location, it may take a while." "How long?" "Could be today. Could be tomorrow morning." No one came that day. Evan drove into town instead. He bought 2 motion sensor lights, more fuel, extra food, and a cheap trail camera from a hardware section of a farm supply store. He almost told the cashier why, but hearing himself say it out loud in a brightly lit store would have made it feel ridiculous. So he didn't. Back at the cabin, he installed the lights at the front and back corners, fixed the trail camera to a tree facing the house, and kept glancing at the tree line while he worked. That evening, he made the decision he should have made earlier. He packed a bag, just essentials: laptop, chargers, clothes, paperwork. If anything felt wrong that night, he'd leave and get a motel in town. Simple. At 8:17 p.m., while he was washing a plate in the sink, both motion lights came on at once, front and back. The cabin brightened at the edges as white beams washed over the snow outside. Evan turned off the faucet. For several seconds, he heard nothing, then a slow crunch from the front porch, another from the back steps. One person couldn't be in both places. His entire body went cold. The front doorknob turned once, not slammed, not jostled, just a slow, deliberate test of the lock. Then the back one did the same. Evan backed away from the kitchen, grabbed his keys and bag, and realized with a sickening jolt that to leave, he'd have to go out one of those doors. He thought about the windows, but they were narrow and the drop into deep snow outside would trap him for precious seconds. He looked toward the bedroom and actually considered hiding, which made him angry enough to think clearly again. He killed the interior lights. The cabin dropped into darkness. Outside, he heard both sets of footsteps stop. He stood motionless, holding his breath. Maybe if whoever was out there thought the place was empty. A sound shattered that idea. 3 sharp knocks came from the living room window. Then, from the bedroom window at the back of the house, 3 more. Evan didn't remember deciding to move. One second he was in the kitchen. The next he was crouched behind the couch, staring at the glow of his own motion lights through the curtains. His breath sounded too loud. His pulse throbbed in his throat. Then a voice came through the front door. A man's voice, muffled by wood and winter gear. Evan. Just his name. Nothing else. No explanation. No threat. No demand. Only his name, spoken in a calm, almost conversational tone. Evan's mouth went dry. He hadn't told many people where he was living. A few coworkers. His ex-wife, only because of mail forwarding. One client, maybe. That was it. The voice came again, a little closer to the door. "Evan, your uncle used to help people." No accent he could place. Not old, not young. Another voice spoke from the back of the house. "Also male. You should open up." Evan nearly dropped the bat. Two voices, two people, both calm. His mind jumped uselessly from possibility to possibility. Friends of his uncle? Locals? Robbers? Mentally unstable drifters? Some kind of sick joke? The first voice said, "We know you're in there." Then came the sound of a glove or palm sliding slowly down the front door from top to bottom. Evan snapped. He ran to the bedroom, threw on boots without untying them, grabbed his bag, and forced open the small side window near the bed. Freezing air dumped into the room. He shoved the bag out first, then climbed after it, landing thigh-deep in snow. The cold hit like a punch. He scrambled upright and plunged toward the tree line instead of the driveway, thinking only that the men would expect him to make for the truck. Branches slapped his face. Snow filled his boots. Behind him came shouting now, louder, stripped of that eerie patience. He didn't look back. His uncle's property line was informal, but Evan knew the woods reasonably well. There was an old deer stand about a quarter-mile east, and beyond the logging trail that eventually connected to the main road. If he could reach it, his foot punched through crusted snow, and he went down hard, losing the bat. He crawled up again, grabbed at saplings for balance, and heard something behind him that made him stop. No crashing pursuit, no frantic search. Just footsteps, walking, not running, keeping pace. He looked back through the trees. Nothing, but he could hear at least one of them now. Crunch, pause, crunch. The kind of pace you take when you're not worried the other person can escape. Evan pushed on until he reached the deer stand, a rotting wooden platform lashed to a tree. He ducked beneath it, crouched in the shadow, and clamped a hand over his mouth to quiet his breathing. Snow fell lightly through the branches. The woods seemed to hold themselves still around him. Then he saw a flashlight beam drifting between the trunks about 50 yards away. It moved slowly, unhurried, tracing the ground. Another beam appeared farther left. They were spreading out. One of the men called softly, "You're making this harder than it has to be." The other one laughed. Not a loud laugh, more like someone amused by a child refusing instructions. Evan felt something in the snow beside his knee and flinched, then looked down. A beer bottle, half buried, old, and next to it, a wool glove so stiff with age it looked petrified. He stared at it, then slowly angled a flashlight on his phone toward the underside of the stand's platform. Words had been carved into the wood above him, not old initials, not random marks. 5 names, cut deep with a knife. At the bottom, much newer than the others, was one word, helped. Evan's stomach turned. His uncle used to help people. That was what the voice had said. A memory surfaced then, something his mother had mentioned years earlier after too much wine at Thanksgiving. Evan's uncle, Dale, let strays stay on the property sometimes. Men passing through, people down on their luck, hunters, workers. He'd been too trusting, she'd said, too lonely. At the time, it had sounded harmless. Now, crouched under the deer stand with those carved names inches from his face, Evan realized something else. These men had not come to a random cabin. They had come back, and they thought the cabin still belonged to Dale. Or maybe they knew it didn't, and that was worse. A flashlight beam slid across a nearby trunk. Too close. Evan shoved himself backward, deeper into shadow, but the snow gave way under him, and he fell into a shallow depression behind the stand. The impact knocked the air from his lungs. The beam snapped toward the sound. "There," one of the men said. Evan lurched up and ran. This time the footsteps behind him broke into a sprint. He burst through the trees onto the logging trail, slipped, recovered, and saw his truck headlights in the distance through the woods to his right. He'd looped wider than he realized. The driveway wasn't far. He angled toward it, lungs burning so badly it felt like he was inhaling knives. The first man came out of the trees behind him, and for a split second, Evan saw him clearly. Dark parka, ski mask, broad build. Ordinary. Horrifyingly ordinary. The second emerged farther back. They weren't huge. They weren't monsters. Just men. That made it worse. Evan reached the truck, yanked the door open, and threw himself inside. As he jammed the key into the ignition, One of the men hit the passenger's side hard enough to rock the cab. The engine coughed once, then turned over. Evan slammed it into reverse. The truck fishtailed in the snow, clipped adrift, then caught traction. He spun onto the driveway as the second man stepped into the headlights and stood there, hands at his sides, making no effort to move until the last second. Evan didn't stop driving until he reached town. The sheriff's office took him seriously after that. 2 deputies went out with him the next morning. They found footprints around the cabin, around the deer stand, and along the logging trail. They found the carvings too, but they didn't find the men. What they did find, half buried behind a cabin near the frozen shoreline, was a rusted coffee containing several old house keys, a stained Polaroid of Evan's uncle standing with 3 unidentified men, and a folded piece of paper sealed in plastic. The writing on the paper was Dale's. It was short. If you're reading this, they came back. Do not let them in. Do not go with them to the lake. If they say I promised anything, they're lying. I made a mistake helping them the first winter. That was all. The sheriff asked Evan whether he wanted to stay elsewhere, while they increased patrols and looked into Dale's history. Evan laughed at the question in a way that didn't sound healthy even to him. He sold the cabin that spring to a company that bought remote properties and stripped them for land value. He never told them everything, just enough to justify taking a low offer. Months later, after the thaw, a deputy called him with one final update. Divers had searched near the shoreline once the ice was gone. They found nothing in the lake. No bodies. No evidence. No explanation for the tracks ending where they did. Before hanging up, the deputy asked Evan one last thing. When they came to the cabin, he said, "Did they ask for your uncle by name?" Evan thought about it. The voice through the door. Calm. Certain. No, they hadn't asked for Dale. They'd asked for him. That night, for the first time in months, Evan dreamed of the cabin. In the dream, he stood inside in darkness while snow tapped softly against the windows. Outside on the porch, 2 men waited with their faces hidden. Beyond them, near the lake, more figures were standing in the snow, motionless and half obscured by wind. He couldn't tell how many. One of the men on the porch lifted a hand and tapped the glass. Then he said, in the same patient voice as before, "You live here now." Mason had been working county snowplow routes for almost 8 years, and by his mid-30s, he'd stopped pretending there was anything peaceful about winter at night. People who didn't do the job imagined quiet roads, falling snow, maybe a thermos of coffee, and the radio humming while the plow carved clean lines through a white landscape. The reality was black ice, dead deer, stranded drivers, hidden ditches, frozen hydraulics, and long stretches of road where you could go an hour without seeing another human being. The snow reflected just enough of the headlights to make the darkness beyond it feel even deeper. Every mailbox looked like a person at the edge of the ditch until you got close. Every shadow made you tap the brakes. Mason worked for the county in northern Wisconsin, covering a rural route made up of back roads, 2 small county highways, and a few stretches that ran past isolated farmhouses and hunting land. In bad weather, he was one of the only people moving through those areas before dawn. He liked the pay, the predictability, and the fact that he could go full shifts with nobody bothering him. What he didn't like was Route 14. Route 14 was technically nothing special. 7 miles of county road through woods, frozen marsh, and an abandoned stretch of family-owned property that no one had lived on in years. It connected 2 better travel roads, so the county still had to maintain it, but there were no businesses on it and only 3 occupied homes across the whole section. Even the guys at the yard spoke about it a little differently. Not like it was haunted. Mason would have rolled his eyes at that. More like it was the place where strange things happened and nobody ever got a satisfying answer. A missing dog found 30 miles away with its chain still attached. A stranded car discovered running in the middle of the road with nobody inside. An old man claiming someone had stood at the end of his driveway for hours during a blizzard, never moving, until morning came and there were no tracks. Mason had heard all of it. He never believed any of it. But he also never stopped feeling relieved when Route 14 was behind him. The storm started just before midnight on a Tuesday in January. By 1:20 a.m., The county garage had called in the night crew, and by 2:05 Mason was rolling out in Plow 6, a heavy orange truck with front blade, underbody scraper, salt spreader, and a heater that worked well enough to keep his boots from freezing. The dispatcher told him visibility was already getting ugly farther north. State Patrol had reported spinouts on Highway 8. Wind gusts were pushing snow sideways and packing drifts into the open sections. Mason took his first loop slow. Main roads first, then secondary roads, then Route 14 near the end. His wipers slapped constantly. The truck rattled and growled. Powder snow streamed to the headlights in bright, endless sheets, making it feel like he was driving through static. He sipped coffee gone lukewarm and kept his shoulders tight and forward, scanning the edges of the road for stalled vehicles or deer eyes. By 3:11 a.m., he turned onto Route 14. The first mile was wooded on both sides, the trees pressing close enough to create a tunnel effect. Then the road opened briefly near a frozen marsh. Then it narrowed again near the abandoned Brackett property, a stretch of land with an old farmhouse, a detached garage, and a long collapsed fence line the county had been arguing for years about whether someone should tear down. Mason had passed it hundreds of times. The house sat well back from the road, barely visible through the trees and snow, with black windows and a sagging porch roof. Half the time you couldn't see it at all unless you knew where to look. That night, he noticed something different before he even reached it. Light, warm yellow light in an upstairs window. Mason frowned and eased off the accelerator. He knew that house was empty. The county knew it was empty. Kids sometimes trespassed there in summer, and once a deputy had been called because someone thought squatters were living inside. But the place had been cleared. Still, there was a soft yellow square in the upper front room, glowing through blowing snow. Mason glanced toward it as the plow rumbled past and felt a small, unpleasant tightening in his chest that came from seeing something where it definitely shouldn't be. He told himself exactly what it probably was. A lantern, flashlight, battery light. Trespassers. Maybe a hunter using it for shelter. He almost kept going. Instead, he grabbed the radio mic and called the county garage. Plow 6 to base. Static. Then, go ahead. I've got activity at the old Brackett place on Route 14. Light in the house. A pause. Copy. You seeing a vehicle? Negative. Anyone outside? Negative. Another pause. Sheriff's dealing with 2 wrecks and a disabled semi. Want us to log it and have someone swing by later? Mason looked through the windshield toward the shrinking outline of the house in his side mirror. Yeah, he said. Log it. He kept driving. At the turnaround near the southern end of his loop, he angled the plow, cleared the intersection, and headed back the opposite direction 20 minutes later. As he approached the Brackett property again, he slowed. The upstairs light was off. That should have made him feel better. It didn't, because now there was someone standing at the edge of the road. Mason's grip tightened on the wheel. The figure stood on the shoulder near the ditch, just before the driveway entrance. Motionless, facing the road. At first, Mason thought it might be a signpost he'd never noticed or a branch bent under snow, but as the truck got closer, the headlights caught reflective stripes on a winter coat. A man, adult, average build, dark knit cap, heavy jacket, hands hanging at his sides. Mason tapped the horn once. The man didn't move. That wasn't normal. People in storms waved, flagged you down, panicked, stumbled into the road, did something. They didn't stand perfectly still and wait. Mason slowed further, blade scraping and roaring as it sent snow spilling off the shoulder. When he was about 30 feet away, the man lifted one arm, not waving, pointing, toward the house. Then he lowered it again. Mason rolled past him, heart thudding harder now, and checked the side mirror. The shoulder behind him was empty. He hit the brakes so hard the truck lurched. Snow hissed beneath the tires. He looked again. Nothing. No man. No movement. No footprints visible from this angle, though the blowing snow could have hidden anything. He sat there with the truck idling, exhaust chugging, pulse pounding in his ears. Then the radio crackled. Plow 6, you copy? Mason grabbed the mic too fast. Yeah, copy. You've gone off GPS for a minute. You stopped. Mason swallowed. Thought, I saw a pedestrian near Brackett. not seeing him now. The dispatcher's voice sharpened slightly. Pedestrian? Yeah. In this weather? Yeah. Stay in the truck. Sheriff's still tied up, but I'll notify again. Mason almost said he must have been mistaken. Then he looked up. The upstairs light was on again. He actually felt his stomach drop. It wasn't faint this time. It was bright and steady, glowing through the same window as before. He stared at it for several seconds, trying to think through the possibilities. Someone inside moving room to room. A battery lantern being carried around. A generator. Headlamp. Reflection. But the light didn't flicker or move. It just stayed there, as if someone had turned on a lamp in a room that should not have had electricity. Mason's first real instinct was to leave. Just finish the route. Let law enforcement handle it. Not his problem. Then he thought about what would happen if there actually was someone stranded inside. Someone injured, elderly, drunk, confused, freezing. He cursed under his breath, flipped on the truck's roof flashers, and turned into the snow-packed driveway. The plow chewed a path up toward the house. Tall weeds and dead saplings scraped the sides of the truck. The house loomed bigger now, skeletal and dark except for that single upstairs window. Snow had drifted against the porch. The garage leaned inward like it was tired. Mason parked facing back toward the road in case he needed to leave fast. He kept the engine running. For almost a full minute, he sat there, looking at the house through the windshield. No movement in the lit room. No one at the windows. No tracks visible in the driveway, except his own fresh plow path. That didn't mean much in the storm, but it was still one more thing he didn't like. He took the flashlight from the passenger seat, zipped his coat, and stepped out. The wind hit him so hard it stole his breath. Snow needled his face. The truck's amber flashers threw rotating color across the drifts and the front wall of the house. Every board groaned softly in the gusts. He climbed the porch steps carefully. One of them sagged under his weight. At the front door, he called out, loud enough to be heard over the wind, "County plow." Nothing. He knocked with his gloved fist. Anybody in there? Still nothing. He shined the flashlight through the dirty glass pane beside the door. A narrow hallway, peeling wallpaper, overturned chair, nothing else. But from somewhere deeper inside the house, he heard a sound, a dull thump, then another, from upstairs. Mason's mouth went dry. He tried the doorknob, expecting it to be locked. It opened. The smell hit him first. Cold rot, wet wood, mold, and something stale underneath it, like old fabric sealed too long in dampness. He stepped into the hallway. The beam of his flashlight shook slightly across warped floorboards and a staircase disappearing upward. Snow had blown in through broken trim around a rear window and melted into dark stains. The place was dead quiet except for the storm outside and the occasional creak of settling lumber. The thump came again, definitely upstairs. "Mason," he called out, though he had no reason to use his own name, except that the silence made speaking feel necessary. "County road crew. If somebody's in here, say something." No answer. He should have left then. Instead, he climbed. Each stair groaned under his boots. Halfway up, he noticed something that stopped him. Wet marks on the steps. Not footprints exactly. More like dark, melted patches spaced at regular intervals, as if someone had been standing there for a long time and the snow had fallen off their clothing in place. At the top of the stairs, the hall split left and right. The lit room was at the far end. Its door was open. Mason approached slowly, flashlight in one hand, the other hovering uselessly near his belt as if he expected to find a weapon there. The room was almost empty. No furniture except an old metal bed frame against the wall. Torn curtains, water stains, exposed floorboards. And on the floor in the center of the room sat a battery-powered camping lantern. That was the light. Mason exhaled shakily, almost laughing from relief and embarrassment at the same time. "Hello," he called. No one. He stepped into the room and swept the flashlight around. That was when he saw the photographs. They were laid out on the floor around the lantern in a rough circle. Maybe 20 of them, maybe more. Polaroids. Some faded badly, some newer. Mason crouched. Every picture showed a road during winter. Not the same road every time, but similar ones, rural, empty, snow-covered. taken at night or just before dawn. Headlights in some, tire tracks in others. A mailbox, a ditch, a stand of trees. He frowned and picked one up. In the center of the image, almost lost in the grain and darkness, stood a person at the roadside. Same posture every time, facing the road, standing still. Mason set it down and picked up another. Same thing, different road. Another, same, in one of the newer photos. The person was standing beside a county plow truck. Mason stared at it. The truck number was visible through snow on the door. 6. A blast of panic hit him so fast and so hard that for a second he couldn't move. He dropped the photo and backed away. Something sounded in the hallway outside the room. A soft scrape. Mason swung the flashlight toward the doorway. No one there, but he was no longer alone in the house. He knew that with the same absolute certainty people sometimes know they've just missed a step in the dark. His skin tightened. The air felt occupied. Then the radio on his shoulder crackled so loudly he jumped. Plow 6? Mason, you copy? He snatched the mic. Yeah. His own voice sounded thin. We got a deputy heading your way now. 10, maybe 15. I'm inside the Brackett house. A long silence. Then, why? Possible trespasser. There are photos up here. Someone's been using this place. Another pause. Then the dispatcher said something that made his knees go weak. Mason, that house burned out electrically years ago. There shouldn't be any light. I know it's a lantern. No, Static hissed. Mason, listen to me. The deputy says don't stay in there. Come back to the truck now. The scrape came again, closer this time. From downstairs. Not the random settling of an old house. A footstep. Then another. Mason moved into the hall, shining the flashlight toward the staircase. At the bottom stood a man in reflective winter gear. The same man from the road. He was looking up. His face was partly covered by a balaclava, but Mason could see enough to know the man was older than he first thought. Maybe late 50s, maybe 60s. Frost clung to his eyebrows. Snow dusted his shoulders. He stood with one hand on the railing like he belonged there. For several seconds, neither of them moved. Then the man spoke in a level, almost weary voice. You weren't supposed to come inside. Mason's throat tightened. Who are you? The man ignored the question. You saw the light, same as the others. What others? The man tilted his head very slightly. The ones who stopped. Mason backed toward the lit room, mind racing, trying to decide whether to run past him, jump a window, or lock himself somewhere upstairs. Stay where you are, Mason said, though it sounded ridiculous the moment he said it. The man took one step up. Mason flashed the beam directly into his face. The man didn't flinch. Another step, then another. Mason turned and ran into the room, slamming the door and throwing his shoulder against it. The latch barely caught. He dragged the rusted bed frame across the floor just as the first hit came against the other side of the door. Not a frantic assault, just one hard shove. Then another. The old wood bowed inward. Mason spun toward the window. It was painted shut. He punched at it, shoved, kicked. The frame groaned but didn't give. The lantern on the floor cast long shadows around the photos. He looked down again and noticed something he'd missed. One picture had writing on the white border. He grabbed it. In block letters, shaky but readable, it said, "He stands in the road until someone lets him in." Another hit shook the door. The bed frame screeched across the floor. Mason grabbed the radio mic. He's in the house. He's trying to get through the door. Static. Then, deputy is 2 minutes out. The door shuttered again, and then stopped. Silence. Mason stood frozen, waiting for the next impact. Nothing came. He listened so hard it hurt. Then, from directly outside the window behind him, came a gentle tap. Mason turned slowly. A face was inches from the glass. Not the older man. Someone else. A second person in winter gear. Face obscured. Standing on the porch roof just outside the upstairs window, looking in. Mason made a sound he would later pretend he didn't make. The figure outside lifted one gloved hand and tapped the glass again, then pointed downward toward the front of the house. Headlights flashed through the blowing snow. The deputy. Mason lurched to the window and finally forced it open a few inches. Enough to scream. The figure outside was gone. Below, a sheriff's SUV slid into the driveway, red and blue light bars painting the storm in violent color. Mason shoved the bed frame aside, tore open the room door, and bolted into the hall. The staircase was empty. So was the first floor. The deputy met him at the front door with his sidearm drawn, shouting questions Mason barely processed. They searched the entire house together, then the garage, then the property. Nobody, no footprints they could trust in the storm. No vehicle, just a landing upstairs, the photos, and Mason's truck idling in the driveway. The deputy collected the photographs in evidence bags. Mason sat in the front seat of the SUV with the heater blasting and couldn't stop looking at the house. At one point, he said, "There were two of them." The deputy glanced at him. "You only described one." "There were two." The deputy didn't answer. At dawn, Mason went back to the county garage to write a statement. Nobody made fun of him, which somehow felt worse. The dispatcher kept looking at him with an expression he couldn't read. His supervisor told him to go home and sleep. That afternoon, a detective called. The photographs had gotten everyone's attention. Several of them were old enough to predate Mason's time with the county. One showed a plow truck from nearly 20 years earlier. Another appeared to show a state trooper cruiser that had belonged to an officer who went missing on duty during a winter storm in 2009. The detective asked whether Mason had touched anything besides a radio, door, and one photo. Mason said he didn't remember. Then the detective asked a stranger question. Did the man ever give his name? No. Did he say anything else? Mason thought about it. You weren't supposed to come inside. You saw the light, same as the others. No, Mason said. But that wasn't true. There had been one more thing. He remembered it later that evening, while sitting alone in his apartment with every light on. As the man had started up the stairs, just before Mason fled into the room, he had said something under his breath, not to Mason, more like to himself, almost annoyed. He'll have to cover my route now. Mason stopped working Route 14 after that. Officially, he requested a change because of stress from the incident. Unofficially, the county didn't argue because 3 weeks later, another driver reported seeing a reflective-coated man standing near the Brackett driveway during early morning plowing. That driver never stopped. He radioed it in and kept going. When deputies checked the property, they found nothing. Spring came, then summer. The road looked ordinary again. Overgrown, quiet, forgettable. The Brackett house was finally demolished in August after the county declared it unsafe. Mason thought that would help. It didn't, because by then, the problem wasn't the house. It was the roads. Sometimes before dawn, driving to work in his own pickup, he'd see someone standing near the shoulder up ahead and feel his entire body lock up before realizing it was just a sign or a mailbox. Sometimes it really was a person, jogger, farmer, someone checking a fence, and the sight of reflective stripes would make him grip the wheel until his hands hurt. Then, in early December the next year, Mason was driving home after sunset on a county highway 2 towns over, nowhere near Route 14, when his headlights caught a man standing at the roadside in blowing snow. Reflective winter coat, hands at his sides, facing the road. Mason's stomach dropped so violently, he nearly went into the ditch. He sped past without looking directly at the man's face. A mile later, shaking so badly he could hardly hold the wheel, he told himself what it had to be: a worker, a stranded driver, someone normal. Then his phone buzzed on the seat beside him. Unknown number. He should not have answered. He did. For a moment there was only static. Then a man's voice said, calm and familiar through the hiss, "You were supposed to stop." The line went dead. Mason changed his number the next day. He sold his place that winter and moved south. He quit plowing entirely. Last anyone from the county heard, he was driving heavy equipment for a construction company outside St. Louis and refused to work night shifts. He still checked weather reports obsessively, still avoided back roads during snow, still locked his doors the second he got home. And every year, usually during the first major storm of the season, he'd get the urge to look at county incident reports from up north. Not because he wanted to, because some part of him needed to know whether it followed him or stayed there. 3 winters after the night at the Brackett house, he found a local article online from a Wisconsin newspaper. A driver had gone missing during a snowstorm after calling roadside assistance from a county road. His truck was later found running, driver's door open, heat still on. No sign of the driver. The road in the background photo looked familiar, not Route 14. Close enough. Mason zoomed in on the image until it blurred. At the far edge of the frame, beyond the truck and half obscured by snow, stood a person in a reflective winter coat, facing the road, motionless, waiting.